Moscow, 1986. A man sits alone in a dimly lit apartment, staring at a photograph he's not supposed to have. The photograph shows a bakery in Dresden, except the bakery burned down 18 years ago. He knows this because his Mossad handler told him during training. He also knows this because 3 hours ago, a Soviet woman casually mentioned it at a dinner party while looking directly into his eyes. David Barnea has been living as Viktor Andreev for 4 months. Viktor is unremarkable, a translator at the East German trade mission who drinks too much and complains about his ex-wife. Viktor has a dead aunt, childhood friends who rarely write, and a minor gambling problem that got him reassigned from the Stasi. Viktor's entire life is documented in files that took 2 years to fabricate. But someone just proved that Viktor's childhood memories are fiction. The question isn't whether his cover is compromised. The question is why the woman who exposed it, Irina Volkova, a mid-level archivist married to a KGB liaison, smiled at him after saying it. Why she touched his arm. Why she whispered, "We should talk sometime," before walking away. David has 48 hours to decide if Irina Volkova is offering him access to Soviet intelligence or setting a trap that will end with his body in an unmarked grave outside Moscow. The woman who can destroy him just told him she knows he's lying, and she wants to meet again. 6 months earlier, Mossad identified a vulnerability in Soviet intelligence operations across the Middle East. The KGB was expanding rapidly, embedding operatives in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, but the entire network was coordinated from Moscow, and Moscow kept paper records. If Mossad could place someone inside Soviet territory with access to administrative records, they could map every Russian asset operating against Israel. The problem was that Moscow didn't accept outsiders. Foreign nationals working in the Soviet Union were monitored constantly. Israeli citizens were impossible to insert. So Mossad created a ghost. Viktor Andreev was born in Dresden in 1951. He attended Humboldt University. He had a brief, undistinguished career with the Stasi until gambling debts forced a quiet reassignment to a trade mission. His file contained childhood photos, university transcripts, letters from his mother, now deceased, and a disciplinary report from 1979 that explained why he'd never advanced beyond mid-level translation work. Every document was real. Forged, but real. David Barnea spent 14 months becoming Viktor. He learned East German dialect patterns. He memorized streets in Dresden he'd never walked. He studied Soviet bureaucratic culture until he could anticipate how a mediocre translator would behave in a system designed to crush ambition. The operation's success depended on one principle. Viktor had to be boring enough to ignore, but useful enough to keep around. David arrived in Moscow in January 1986. His job was legitimate. He translated agricultural equipment specifications for East German exports. Low security clearance, no access to sensitive information. Exactly what Mossad needed. For 3 months, David did nothing suspicious. He attended embassy functions. He drank vodka and complained about Soviet winters. He filed accurate translations and avoided conversations about politics. Then, in April, he was approached by Grigory Volkov. Volkov worked in the KGB's second chief directorate, counterintelligence. His official role was administrative liaison for foreign trade missions. His actual job was identifying intelligence threats and potential assets. Volkov started with casual questions. How long had David lived in Dresden? Did he miss East Germany? What did he think of Moscow? Then, during their third meeting, Volkov asked about David's university experience, specifically about Professor Werner's seminar on Slavic linguistics at Humboldt University. David confirmed he'd taken the seminar. It was in his legend file. But Professor Werner never taught at Humboldt. He taught at Freie Universität in West Berlin. David realized the error half a second after responding. Volkov's expression didn't change. He just smiled, finished his coffee, and said, "You must be thinking of someone else." That night, David sent an encrypted message to Vienna, possible compromise, awaiting confirmation. The response came 36 hours later, maintain cover, continue mission. For 2 weeks, David waited for arrest. It never came. Volkov continued meeting him for drinks. Their conversations remained casual, friendly even. David couldn't determine if Volkov suspected him or if the professor question had been coincidence. Then in June, Volkov invited him to a dinner party at his apartment. That's where David met Irina. She was younger than her husband, early 30s, quiet, and worked as an archivist at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She asked polite questions about David's childhood in Dresden. She mentioned the bakery near Albertplatz. She described its rye bread, the old woman behind the counter, the cracked tile by the entrance. David described it perfectly, because it was in his training file. Then Irina said the bakery burned down in 1968. Before Viktor Andreev would have been old enough to remember it, David laughed, said his mother must have told him about it, changed the subject. But Irina held his gaze for 3 seconds too long, and when she walked away, she whispered, "We should talk sometime." David now has to determine if Irina Volkova is KGB counterintelligence running an entrapment operation, or if the wife of a KGB officer just offered to become a source. Either way, the woman who knows his cover is fake wants a private conversation, and refusing might confirm her suspicion. David spent 4 days analyzing Irina's behavior. Her tone when she mentioned the bakery, the way she touched his arm, the 3-second pause before she walked away. Every detail could mean the difference between recruitment opportunity and execution. Mossad's directive was clear: maintain cover, assess the contact, report before engaging. But David couldn't report without potentially exposing a communication channel the KGB might already be monitoring. And he couldn't ignore Irina without confirming that Viktor Andreev had something to hide. On June 18th, Irina solved the problem for him. She appeared at the trade mission during lunch, carrying a stack of ministry documents that needed German translation. Routine work. She requested David specifically, said his translations were more accurate than the previous translator. She handed him the documents in the main office. Witnesses everywhere. Nothing suspicious. Except one document had a handwritten note in the margin: Gorky Park. Wednesday, 3 p.m., alone. David arrived 15 minutes early. He positioned himself where he could see approaches from 3 directions. He carried nothing that could identify him as intelligence, no cameras, no recording devices, nothing that couldn't be explained as a translator taking a walk during his afternoon break. Irina arrived exactly on time. She didn't acknowledge him immediately. She stopped at a vendor, bought sunflower seeds, then sat on a bench 20 meters away. After 5 minutes, she stood and walked deeper into the park. David followed at a distance. She led him to a section near the pond. Fewer people, more trees, ambient noise from traffic that would defeat directional microphones. When she finally stopped, she didn't turn around. She just said, "My husband knows you're not Viktor Andreev." David's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket pocket, toward the cyanide capsule sewn into the lining. But Irina continued, "He's known since April," the professor questioned. "It was a test designed by his section chief. You failed." She turned to face him. Her expression wasn't threatening, it was exhausted. "Grigory didn't report it because I asked him not to." David said nothing. Irina sat on a bench, stared at the pond, and explained. She'd been recruited by British intelligence in 1982. Not because she believed in ideology or wanted money, because her daughter was sick. Leukemia. The treatment she needed wasn't available in the Soviet Union. MI6 promised that if Irina provided intelligence, they would arrange medical care in London. For 4 years, Irina passed documents to her MI6 handler. Low-level material at first, ministry reports, personnel rosters, nothing that would trigger counterintelligence alerts. Her husband never suspected. Then, 6 months ago, Grigory was assigned to investigate a suspected British intelligence network operating through academic exchanges. During the investigation, he found a pattern in document access logs, files that had been copied but never officially requested. The pattern led to his wife. He confronted her at home. She told him everything. About their daughter, about MI6's promise, about the fact that Soviet doctors had given their daughter 6 months to live. Grigory made a choice. He didn't report his wife. Instead, he became complicit. He helped her avoid surveillance. He fed false information to his section chief to protect her access. He betrayed his country because his daughter was dying. Then, 3 months ago, MI6 stopped responding to Irina's communications. No explanation, no extraction offer, just silence. Their daughter was deteriorating rapidly. Soviet doctors couldn't help. British intelligence had abandoned them. When Grigory identified David as a foreign intelligence operative, he told Irina, because he thought maybe Israeli intelligence could do what the British wouldn't. Irina looked directly at David and said, "I have access to personnel files for every Soviet intelligence officer working in the Middle East. Names, assignments, cover identities. Everything you came to Moscow to find." She paused. "But I need something first. My daughter needs treatment. Real treatment. Outside the Soviet Union. If Mossad can arrange that, I'll give you everything." David stared at her. This wasn't recruitment. This was extortion wrapped in desperation, and it violated every protocol Mossad had for handling potential defectors. But Irina wasn't offering to defect. She wanted to stay in Moscow with her husband, with her daughter, while simultaneously betraying Soviet intelligence. She wanted David to trust that a woman whose 4-year relationship with MI6 had ended in abandonment wouldn't do the same to Mossad. David asked the only question that mattered: why did MI6 stop responding? Irina's expression changed. "Because they found out Grigori knows. They think it's a KGB entrapment operation." David sent an encrypted message to Vienna that night. He outlined Irina's offer, her MI6 history, the fact that her KGB husband was protecting her, and the core problem: there was no way to verify if this was a legitimate intelligence opportunity or an elaborate KGB trap using a sick child as bait. Mossad's response took 72 hours. When it came, it wasn't what David expected. Irina Volkova is a confirmed MI6 asset. British intelligence suspended contact because they suspected KGB compromise, but MI6 believes the compromise came from their side, not hers. Someone in British intelligence leaked information about Irina's recruitment. MI6 thinks the KGB knows about her but is running a counter-operation to identify other British assets. The message continued. If Irina is still operational and her husband is genuinely protecting her, she represents the highest value intelligence access in Moscow. But if KGB counterintelligence is using her daughter's illness to lure foreign intelligence into a provable conspiracy, everyone involved will be executed. The final line: decision is yours. We cannot extract you if this fails. David realized that Mossad wasn't ordering him to proceed. They were telling him that if he chose to work with Irina, he would be operating without backup, without extraction guarantees, and without certainty that the woman offering him Soviet intelligence wasn't the weapon being used to destroy him. He also realized something else. Grigory Volkov, the KGB officer who'd exposed David's cover, had multiple opportunities to arrest him. He hadn't, which meant either Volkov was genuinely trying to save his daughter, or he was waiting for David to commit an actionable intelligence crime that would justify arresting everyone involved. David had to decide if a Soviet counterintelligence officer's love for his dying daughter was real enough to bet his life on, and he had 48 hours before Irina's next scheduled contact. David met Irina again on June 23rd, same park, different location. This time she brought a canvas shopping bag, the kind Soviet women carried for groceries. Inside were photographs, not documents. Photographs of documents, personnel files, assignment rosters, cover identities for Soviet intelligence officers operating in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. Exactly what Mossad had sent David to Moscow to find, but Irina didn't hand them over. She held the bag and said, "My daughter's name is Anya. She's 7 years old. She likes drawing. She wants to be a veterinarian. She has 2 months." David looked at the bag, then at Irina. He said, "I can't promise anything. I can only pass your request to people who might be able to help." Irina's expression didn't change. "That's not good enough." She started to walk away. David grabbed her arm, too hard, too fast, the kind of mistake that draws attention. 2 men sitting near the pond looked toward them. David released her immediately and said, quietly, "What do you want me to promise?" Irina turned back. "I want you to promise that if Mossad can't help, you'll contact the Americans, or the French, or anyone who can get my daughter out of this country before she dies." David understood what she was actually asking. She wanted him to burn his cover, to expose himself to multiple intelligence services, to destroy his operational security for a child he'd never met. He said yes. Irina handed him the bag. David returned to his apartment and photographed every document: 47 personnel files, names, birthplaces, operational assignments, known aliases, the kind of intelligence that could dismantle Soviet operations across the Middle East. But as he worked, he noticed something wrong. 3 of the files contained information that was too detailed. Not just names and assignments, psychological profiles, family vulnerabilities, known vices. The kind of analysis that took years to compile. The kind of information that wouldn't be stored in routine personnel files. David stopped photographing. He examined the 3 files more carefully. All 3 officers were assigned to Damascus. All 3 had been in position for less than 6 months. All 3 profiles mentioned specific vulnerabilities that seemed designed for exploitation. It looked like targeting information. Or it looked like bait. David sat in his apartment for 3 hours, trying to determine if Irina had given him genuine intelligence, or if the KGB had seeded false information to identify how Mossad would respond. If he passed the documents to his handlers and Mossad acted on them, the KGB would know their operation had been compromised. If he questioned the document's authenticity, he'd be admitting he didn't trust Irina, which might cause her to stop cooperating. He decided to pass everything to Vienna and let analysts determine authenticity. The message he sent included one additional line: source reliability unknown. Recommend verification before action. Vienna's response came 18 hours later. Information appears genuine. Matches existing intelligence on 2 of 3 Damascus officers. Proceeding with operational planning. David felt relief, then immediate doubt. If the information was genuine, why had Irina included targeting data that seemed too convenient? And why had she insisted on a promise before handing over documents that could have simply been left in a dead drop? He couldn't determine if he was overthinking or if his instincts were warning him about something he couldn't yet identify. On June 28th, Irina contacted him again. She used the same method, a handwritten note in translated documents. This time the message said, "My husband wants to meet you." David's first instinct was to abort. Meeting Grigory Volkov directly violated every compartmentalization protocol, but refusing might confirm that Viktor Andreev had something to hide. He sent an emergency message to Vienna, KGB liaison, requesting direct contact. Recommend abort and extract. Vienna's response: maintain cover. Assess intent, do not commit to anything. David met Volkov on July 1st at a bar near Lubyanka, the KGB headquarters. Volkov was already drinking when David arrived. He gestured to the empty chair across from him and said, "Sit." David sat. Volkov poured vodka into a second glass and pushed it across the table. "I know you're not Viktor Andreev. I've known since April. The professor question was my section chief's idea. You failed." David's hand moved toward his pocket. Volkov noticed and said, "If I wanted you arrested, you'd already be in Lefortovo." He took a long drink and continued, "I didn't report you because my wife asked me not to. She thinks you can help our daughter. I think she's wrong. But I love my wife more than I love my country." David said nothing. Volkov leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pass the documents my wife gave you to your intelligence service. They're going to verify the information and start planning operations. Then, in approximately 3 weeks, 2 of the officers whose files you photographed are going to be arrested by Syrian authorities." David's stomach dropped. Volkov smiled without humor. "Not because the information is false, because it's real. And when those officers are arrested, my section chief is going to start investigating how their identities were compromised. The investigation will lead to document access logs. Those logs will show that my wife accessed those files." He paused. "Unless someone intervenes first." David finally spoke. "What do you want?" Volkov finished his vodka. "I want you to tell your intelligence service that my wife's information is compromised, that they should delay operations for 6 months. Long enough for me to falsify access logs and shift suspicion away from her." David stared at him. "You're asking me to sabotage my own operation." Volkov stood. "I'm asking you to keep your promise to my wife. Because if those officers are arrested in 3 weeks, Irina will be executed, and our daughter will die in a Soviet hospital." He walked toward the door, then stopped. "You have 48 hours to decide if you're willing to sacrifice intelligence for a child's life." David sat alone in the bar, trying to determine if Grigory Volkov had just saved his operation or destroyed it, and whether the KGB officer who'd exposed his cover was genuinely desperate or running the most sophisticated entrapment operation David had ever encountered. David sent the message to Vienna at 2:47 a.m. on July 2nd. He recommended delaying operations based on Volkov's warning. He explained the risk of premature action exposing Irina. he outlined the KGB officer's request to falsify access logs. Vienna's response arrived 6 hours later, request denied. Operations proceed as scheduled. Extract yourself within 72 hours. Mossad had made a calculation. The intelligence Irina provided was too valuable to delay. 2 confirmed Soviet officers operating in Damascus represented immediate threats to Israeli assets. Waiting 6 months meant 6 months of continued operations against Israel. The institutional decision was rational. The human cost was Irina's life. David had one option left. He could warn Irina directly, but doing so would confirm his intelligence role and potentially trigger the exact investigation Volkov was trying to prevent. Or he could follow orders, extract himself, and let events unfold. He chose a third path. On July 3rd, David requested a meeting with Volkov. They met at the same bar. David told him the truth. My service won't delay. Operations are moving forward. You have less than 3 weeks. Volkov's expression didn't change. He just nodded slowly and said, "Then we're both dead." David leaned forward. "Unless you defect, all 3 of you, my service can arrange extraction. Your daughter gets treatment. You disappear." Volkov laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You think the KGB doesn't monitor defection attempts? The moment we try to leave Moscow, we're arrested. And even if we made it out, my wife's information becomes worthless. Every officer she compromised gets reassigned. 4 years of intelligence work disappears." He stood to leave, then paused. "There's one other option. My section chief is planning a security review next month. If someone, say a careless trade mission translator, accidentally leaves classified material in a public location, it creates a different investigation pathway, one that doesn't lead to my wife." David understood immediately. Volkov was asking him to stage a security breach that would provide cover for how the personnel files were compromised. It meant David would become the identified leak. It meant he couldn't extract quietly. It meant sacrificing his legend to save Irina. Volkov left the bar without waiting for an answer. On July 7th, David placed a folder containing technical documents, marked with false classification stamps, in a parked trash receptacle. He ensured a KGB surveillance team observed him doing it. Within 6 hours, he was detained for questioning. The interrogation lasted 3 days. David maintained that he'd accidentally taken the wrong documents from his office. He claimed the classification stamps were administrative errors. He acted confused, apologetic, and incompetent. The KGB concluded he was exactly what his legend suggested, a mediocre translator who'd made a stupid mistake. He was expelled from the Soviet Union on July 12, 1986. 2 weeks later, 2 Soviet intelligence officers were arrested in Damascus. Syrian authorities claimed the arrests resulted from signals, intelligence intercepts. The KGB investigation focused on communication security failures, not document access. Irina Volkova's name never appeared in the investigation. The intelligence David extracted from Moscow identified 47 Soviet intelligence officers operating across the Middle East. Mossad used the information to dismantle networks in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. The operation was considered one of the most successful infiltrations of the Cold War. But the cost was permanent. Grigory Volkov's falsified access logs held for 6 months. Then in January 1987, a separate KGB investigation into British intelligence networks identified inconsistencies in ministry document logs. The investigation expanded. Irina's access pattern was discovered. She was arrested on February 3, 1987. Grigory was arrested the same day. Both were charged with espionage. Their daughter Anya was placed in a state facility. British intelligence confirmed the arrests through separate channels. MI6's assessment concluded that the investigation was triggered by Volkov's falsified logs, the very protection that had initially saved Irina. Grigory and Irina Volkov were executed on March 18, 1987. Anya died 4 months later in a Soviet hospital. David Barnea learned about the executions through classified briefings in Tel Aviv. Mossad's assessment noted that the Volkov's arrests likely resulted from cumulative counterintelligence investigations rather than any single operational failure. The assessment concluded that David's actions in Moscow were operationally sound and strategically justified. David never agreed with that assessment. He'd promised Irina he would contact other intelligence services if Mossad couldn't help. He never did. He'd staged a security breach to protect her identity. It worked for 6 months. Then it failed. The intelligence he extracted saved Israeli lives. The deception he maintained cost 3 Soviet lives. Both facts were true. Neither provided comfort. David Barnea never returned to fieldwork after Moscow. He transitioned to intelligence analysis, roles that didn't require maintaining false identities or making promises he couldn't keep. He never spoke publicly about the Volkov operation. When colleagues mentioned Moscow, he changed the subject. In 1994, after the Soviet Union's collapse, he requested access to KGB archives through intermediary channels. He wanted to know if Grigory Volkov had genuinely been trying to save his daughter, or if the entire operation had been a sophisticated KGB entrapment that simply took longer to execute than expected. The archives confirmed what David had suspected but never wanted to believe: Grigory Volkov had been protecting his wife. The falsified access logs were real. The execution was the consequence of an investigation Volkov couldn't predict. The man who exposed David's cover had died trying to keep a promise to his wife. David kept the photograph Volkov had given him, the one of Anya in her hospital bed. He never showed it to anyone. But he never discarded it either. Some deceptions succeed because people believe the lie. Others succeed because people choose to believe the truth is worth dying for. David spent 30 years in intelligence work trying to determine which category his Moscow operation belonged to. He never found an answer. If you're interested in more intelligence operations where deception, identity, and human cost intersect in ways that challenge simple moral frameworks, explore the Hidden Ops Archive.